So how many of you have heard us already? Okay, so we're not going to do it again to you in the same way. And our, which is essentially a PowerPoint which keeps evolving, because our...
Who are you?
Huh? Yeah, I'll tell you. So we're the Vermont Cannabis Collaborative, which is sort of a northern Vermont version of homegrown Vermont-ish, right? We're homegrown Vermont. I mean, you're more of a southern group, right? Southern Vermont?
We're all over.
Are you?
Yeah.
Home grows over the whole state?
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, okay. So I'm just saying, our genesis was in Chittenden County. And the question that we were asking is, in the process of legalization of cannabis, which you have seen for 10 years now, going from decriminalization to industrial hemp to medicinal dispensaries, to now last year a couple of bills that actually were proposing legalization, one in the House, one in the Senate. We see this momentum, and our goal was to try to foster a conversation from a point of view which Hinda and I and the other dozen people involved with this organization that started it have come to think about as there is an opportunity today for development of a new kind of an industry. It already exists in Vermont, it's just not visible. So how do we help make visible this cannabis industry that is systematically moving towards legalization in Vermont, but also nationally, in such a way that Vermont can gain significant opportunity and advantage as an economic driver. So we come from an economic development, business development, job creation point of view, recognizing, as Rand indicated, that we have $100, $200 million of sales, and they did not even include in their survey, to get to that number, the amount of sales that happened to tourists. Because what they did is they interviewed 1,000 or so Vermont citizens. So what we know about in terms of that RAND study is they may be 50 to 100% low in their estimates of the amount of consumption of cannabis in Vermont. I have no idea how much of that is actually produced in Vermont, but a fair amount of it. There's also a fair amount that comes in from outside of Vermont. So simply on the looking at, we have this economy, there is a demand, there is a supply for that. How do we begin to understand the advancement of an industry that would be a cohesive approach, that would optimize economic development? That's where we started. And the process of asking that question has got us more aware of issues associated with safety and prevention for people who might be vulnerable to having cannabis, the relationship of cannabis to the existing regulated tobacco and alcohol industries. And so we can't just be about economic development, even though that's where we wanted to sort of start the conversation.
Can I just introduce you, Will, and myself?
Yeah.
Because I don't know if people know us, because we're from Chittenden County, etc. But this is Will Rapp. He's founder of the Intervale and quite well known nationally for food to plate, agricultural, sustainable agriculture. So as we look at the cannabis industry, we have someone here with a lot of knowledge in that way. I really want to tell you who we are and what we're trying to do and get input. So he's on the steering committee. We have Alan Newman as well, who is founder of Magic Hat Beer, so he has a lot of industry knowledge of the small brew industry that's all over our state. We have Judy McIsaac Robertson, who was the founder of Highland Sugar Works, which is a maple industry company. Myself, I'm Hinda Miller. I was an entrepreneur and designed Jog Bra way back when, in the 80s, and I served for 10 years as a senator for Chittenden County in the economic development, committee. And so each of us, and Michael Jagger, who is world-renowned for his brand development in brands like Burton and others, so we just all came together and said, we have got to really look at this as a potential for our state. And someone who's been in the economic development, I've seen a lot of things come in, but this we really have to examine. And that's what pulled us all together. We had a meeting June 4th, and Bob came. We invited 60 people showed up, different people, so we could get the conversation. We are a collaborative, so we're working on how to collaborate. We've done community meetings in Brattleboro, we've done it in St. Jay, we're here in Bennington. So we do have
Mad River Valley.
And Mad River Valley, we're going to Johnson State College. So we're getting as much input as we can to make sure that we understand what people are talking about. For instance, Shap Smith, as we know, is candidate for governor. He just said that he thought that he would support a legalized cannabis industry as long as we take care of our young people. As Will said, education, recovery, highway safety, public safety, all the good things that we need to support a well-regulated, quality, and our image is East Coast Center of Excellence. How can we look at the cannabis industry with all our intellectual understanding, with our growers who have a lot of knowledge about growing, with the entrepreneurs around the state, with our state agencies, for instance, we're doing a collaboration with the Department of Health. How do you do that well? So our view of this is Vermont is small. One of the key elements is we can collaborate. So we're asking for collaboration. It hasn't been that easy, to tell you the truth, but we're working on it, and we're moving forward with as much input from people like Stuart and other people. Children's healthy youth is #1 for us, value. Healthy youth, how do we do that? And Will went through that, and I went through that. One of our principles is opportunity for many in this cannabis industry. So how do we do that? Will and his team, we're in summer study groups right now. Will is leading an industry study committee. We're looking at economic model so that we can see how many jobs might be created. We're sort of gathering around a number of maybe 5,000 jobs in the beginning. More jobs?
Especially after creativity kicks into the workplace and has been stultified for all these years.
Great.
By keeping people out of the workplace simply because they have to be P-tested to get a good job.
Yeah.
So some people have been entrepreneuring life rather than jobs.
Yes. Okay. Good point. I don't know how we capture that,
You
but it's a
can't
very
capture
good point.
That's the uncapturable element. This is what you're doing is you're replacing the currency, because currency implies flow. We don't have a currency in our economy. All the money is in the 99% and in the banks, and it's not flowing in the street. So we're not sharing it, and we're not generating revenue from it. So cannabis becomes another form of currency, which is why the governments currently oppose it and are very leery about letting it out of their control. Quite frankly, personally, me, from what I know and what I feel, I prefer cannabis be regulated about the same level of tomatoes. And we teach our children well, and they know it's an adult thing, and and see if we can get alcohol and opiates behind us. Because people can use the opioid system and the alcohol central nervous effects with marijuana. I like to say, and this is in medical school lore, what's the difference between a drug and a poison?
Drug is anything that alters your mind.
Nope.
Right?
Nope.
No?
Poison will kill you.
Yeah.
So the difference is dose. At what dose does cannabis become lethal? I argue it's food or an herb and not a drug.
Is there any room in here?
I want to.
You're all giving your credentials. I moved here in May of 10 from the New Jersey area. And at the peak of my career, I was the one that brought you international telecommunications. So in Y2K, I was the one who signed off on the international systems of AT&T. Because I only had a Master of Social Work in Administration Policy and Planning.
So I just want to make sure that we have that our agenda here,
Get a job.
So our agenda here today is to basically recognize that we're on a spectrum toward some kind of legalization happening. So our question is, what's the best way for it to happen for Vermont to own it in the way Vermont would like to own it? That's what we're trying to advance. And because of the fact that we essentially are not in a place for a regular kind of presentation, what I would really like is maybe you helping us answer some questions that are coming up for us about the way we might be able to present to the legislature. Are there any legislators here? Our last meeting we had 4 or 5?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think what you're trying to say is you want to know if we could do it the Vermont way. I mean,
We're trying to understand it. So
Define what the Vermont way is.
What is your vision for it? Are you trying to make something like an Amsterdam setting where people can walk into a store and buy some flowers and smoke it, or is it a walk in, get it, and take it home with you?
Stuart knows more. Partly what we're trying to do is present. So what we heard yesterday was Shap Smith saying, I want to legalize, I want to get started fast. So he's the Speaker of the House. He's going to set the agenda for introducing legislation in the legislature next year. He's going to, but here's what he said. He said, let's do it fast at the beginning of the session so we don't distract ourselves for the entire session. So
think about it. There's snap judgment.
Let me just say one thing, that having the Speaker of the House, who hasn't been a big fan of the idea, state yesterday that he will not stand in the way of legalization is a big deal. Which means, folks, it's going to happen. Yes. And what the job is, thanks to the people that are in the room today, is to help the legislature do it. Give them the tools and give them the information.
Write the law that you want to see passed.
Well, no. Honestly, I think we need to define what that Vermont way is.
Right.
You know, and so Stuart has some interesting ideas about that. We hopefully have some interesting ideas. Others of you might have interesting ideas. We're trying to really assemble the possibility that we can not offer the comprehensive legislation, because that's the job of the legislature. Yeah. What we're trying to do is take pieces of this and explore what's possible. Just for example, this question of the RAND, I know some of you don't fully believe what the RAND report said, whether or not it's true or not, we have a framework to start. We're trying to enhance that framework so we understand the scope of the industry that currently exists here now, how much demand there is, how much supply there is, and how much cultivation would be appropriate if we actually give permits out. Now, Stuart, I think you're like, don't worry about giving permits out. Everyone should have a permit?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that.
Yeah, I would say everybody should. Do you want me to just give like a 3-minute brief?
Yeah.
Okay. And if it was ideal, it would be like the end of Prohibition. The government would just repeal it, and states, if they felt they had a problem, would then have hearings and say, how do we fix it? But now all of a sudden we're presupposing problems. And then we're presupposing rules to deal with the problems that we're presupposing. So, again, I'm going to propose something, and I'm going to propose that everybody, first of all, everybody in Vermont is equal under the law. Any statute written, everybody should be equal. Whether you're big or small or rich or poor, it doesn't really matter. So everybody should be able to grow on a 10-by-10 plot, be able to share it, keep what they grow, and give it away and use it, and without having to register. Because what that does is, right now, you know, people are growing and it's not legal, so they're in the woods. They're under the radar. Whatever money they make, if they do sell it, a lot of people just grow for their own and for their friends. You know, they don't go shopping online. They spend it in town. They go out to dinner. They buy things. So to take that money out of the community and give it anywhere else is really absurd. These towns are struggling. We're all struggling. You know, there's no really wealthy area here. We've got to keep the money in town. So how do you get the people out of the woods and into some kind of transparency so that they can actually spend the money, you know, and not have to worry about helicopters and this and that. And in talking, you have a 10 by 10 plot, that's it, you can have it, and you can buy additional 10 by 10s. That becomes a unit. So if you want a license to sell, you pay so much per 10 by 10. Everybody pays the same. If you've got 20,000 square feet, you've got to buy 200 licenses. If they're $100 a piece, it's $20,000 if you charge $1 a square foot. So
they're saying that people just have a piece of property. If you want to grow on your property, the state will sell a permit to allow you to grow.
Yes, the state. No, you can grow for yourself.
On my own property, I could grow.
You grow for yourself. You have a 10 by 10.
You know what?
You can share it with your friends.
I want to be careful about getting too much into the details of this.
So
this is an approach.
It's an approach, and the idea is that everybody's the same. There's no big person that gets a license. There's no state-sanctioned monopolies.
There's no buddy of the politician.
There's no buddy. Everybody is equal.
We're going under that presumption, Stuart.
Well,
so we still have to talk about perhaps a three-tiered system that will
So Stuart has a point of view. So and really, I don't want to.
I like it. Very good idea.
What Stuart's talking about is the mechanism of production, right? And so that might be the right way to do. I have, you know, what Chap Smith said yesterday is, go assemble as much good information as you can and bring us your best ideas. So that's what we're about right now. The process of production is only part of the issue. It's how do you distribute it? How does it get processed? Do edibles get allowed? How do you do R&D? Because if we're gonna, what's our opportunity here? Hinda and I and the people involved with this see it as analogous to craft beer or specialty cheese or our maple syrup industry, where we have created a sense of quality that is real. It's also branded and promoted as such. So can we do that with the cannabis industry? To do that, you have to be careful about having the right kind of quality product, the right kind of protocols and packaging of that product, the right kind of R&D, the right kind of genetics development, the right kind of relationship with universities that might help you create agronomic solutions to be more productive. So if someone buys 10 of Stuart's 10 by 10 things, they have 1,000 square feet that they can grow in. That might be something they want to do in a greenhouse. How do you optimize that opportunity so that you can, in Vermont, grow it all year long? There's a training and education opportunity there that if we took it out of the backwoods and we made it visible and we gave people access to education to figure out how to do that very well, that could become the underpinning of a new industry that evolves in Vermont. That's what we're trying to imagine. I got a call yesterday from someone who is a major equipment leaser in Vermont. He said, I want to get into the cannabis business. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, I see an opportunity to help people who want to grow indoors buy the lights and buy the oxygenation systems.
$3,000 worth of stuff for $300 down.
Whatever. So there's this spread of business opportunities, whether it's like 4,000 or 5,000 new jobs that were created in the local food movement in the last 4 or 5 years. It might be like that. It might be more than that. But what we have to do is sort of make sure that we can create a structure that is cohesive with the Vermont values, but also it has to be passable, right? I mean, right now, imagine that we are 10 years ago. We wouldn't be having this conversation like now. No. Imagine it's 10 years from now. What will the conversation be like? It might be, everyone can do it, like tomatoes, right?
Tomatoes and make your own oil,
so
your own food in.
We might be, so we don't know where we're going to be, but we do know that we have this very interesting window of opportunity right now with the legislature saying, yeah, maybe. So how do we package something that helps them do their job? We're not doing their job for them, but we're giving them ideas. So in some way, Stuart, you might have the best idea going, but it might not be tenable in terms of what's passable. So at some level, we have to come back and ask that
I have a quick
question.
clarifying question. What makes you think that Vermont will be the first and only state in New England and New York to pass cannabis?
So it's a great question. Let me answer that question. As you know, every other state has done it by initiative, public proposition. You know, we're competing legislatively with Maine, with Massachusetts, with Rhode Island, with other states, right?
Rhode Island has a bill in the legislature right now.
Yep, we have them too, though, in the legislature right now. So now, what the RAND reports said is whoever does it first in New England is going to get a really big leap. It won't be a sustainable leap, but what if we get that first leap, and we also develop an industry around it that generates the kind of ambiance and branding and credibility that we have with our specialty cheese
industry. Were you planning on opening up retail, or
that's
the plan would be to open up retail?
See, I don't have a plan for that. What Stuart was talking about was a production approach.
Well, that production approach would be perfect if you actually had retail available.
Right. Retail can go with it.
So
there's a retail side to that.
What Jeanette White's bill says, Senator from Brattleboro, is there should be 5 kinds of licenses, right? There should be a grower license, there should be a retail license, there should be a wholesale license, there should be an edible processing license, and there should be an R&D testing license. So now let me just ask those of you.
And a farm license now.
That's why I said a grower. She asked.
Is that how the other states are doing it at the moment?
Yeah, but that's too
many. Are those
many.
same licenses?
It should be one.
Are those same licenses in existence in the states?
I do it.
It looks like
Some are. Yeah, some are. Yeah, some are.
Allowed to trade in kind, and you can sell your wares at the farm.
So what's interesting is some of you, like Stuart, have much more experience than I do in this legislative development process, but I'm aware enough to know that we have 2 bills in the legislature right now. We have Jeanette White coming up with, she's taken a lot of input from people in this room and has come up with another proposal for how her legislation might work. And do we like it? Do we not like it? How can we enhance it, building on that framework? Recognizing that, and Bob knows this more than I do, there are certain gatekeepers in the legislature who we're going to have to help understand what their point of view is, because they will stop or start the process more effectively than others of the legislature.
And part of our strategy, I want to get input, is having been in the legislature for 10 years, we have been building infrastructure for our economic development. We have a Vermont Seed Capital Fund. We have a Vermont Center of Emerging Technologies. We have
Sustainable Jobs Fund.
Sustainable Jobs Fund, NOFA, that knows how to certify things. We have Vermont origin rules that says if it comes from Vermont, it has to be 80% raw materials from Vermont. We have a Vermont brand that I know we've been putting a lot of money into. I know because I sat on appropriations and economic development. So what's unique, I think, about what we're doing here is that we already have the infrastructure that we can overlay this cannabis with thoughtful, conscious thinking. And one of our bylines is not necessarily Vermont way, but common sense commerce. How do we make it safe, regulated, measured, high quality, and trustworthy, with the least amount of bureaucracy, with the most amount of effectiveness? When you think about the opportunity, when have we had a white paper to create a whole new industry without bureaucracy? I was in economic development every year. The alcohol industry, the brew industry, they have to come for one more law that allows them to drink it here as well as here, and it is so bureaucratic the way that our small brew industry is regulated, because the essence of it came from when it was from Prohibition, right? But this is a whole new slate. How do we use technology for safety? How do we tag our plants? How do we, this is a right now industry. So when we look at the systematic way, systemic way, change, there are a lot of things that we can employ. We're not necessarily going to hire a lot of people to go out into everyone to make sure people are doing the law. How do we be smart about it? And one other thing I wanted to say is collaborative. We're not doing necessarily the best recommending the best education or how to do highway safety. Senator Sears in Judiciary is going to do highway safety, and public safety will go there. So who is in that circle of collaborators who we can put into the circle and get the best solution for highway safety? So that's really what we're after, circles of collaboration, which we do well in the legislature. We do well with our NGOs, our private sector, our public sector. We do that well in Vermont. So we're encouraging that process for best recommendations.
So can I tell a quick story? Because Hinda and I went up to Jay Peak and met with Bill Stenger, who is the mastermind of Jay Peak. Just because we're trying to get business leaders to be on our team, right? And he went, I don't know about that stuff. And so we talked and talked, and he said, you know what my problem is? My problem is I hired 1,500 people for the ski season, and they're all young, and they typically come in or end up having some kind of a substance abuse problem. Many of them do. It's not cannabis isn't the main issue. It's much more. It's much more alcohol
and heroin
and things. So we began to explore that problem more deeply with him, and what we really came away with is people like him who are hiring the people who come to the workforce for the first time are having some real challenges. And what if, and this is why I support the idea of if it's sold, you tax it. And then what happens to those taxes? Our view is that we probably need to spend a lot of money early on in the investment in education, safety, and protection of vulnerable populations. And that's, you know, that was actually a new awareness for us. And in fact makes me want to say, how do we enhance the amount of taxes that we could actually take from this new industry, not in a way that depletes the potential of businesses to succeed, but in a way that brings new funding into the substance abuse problem that we have overall. So even though only 9% of, it seems the research says, of people who use cannabis might actually become addicted, much lower than alcohol, there is a problem there. And worse of all, there's a perception problem. People who say, I'm afraid of my kids getting new access to it. I don't know if you saw the research that came out of the state of Washington last week, but after 2 years, the incidence of kids using cannabis from pre-legalization to post-legalization is flat or down.
In Colorado also.
In Colorado. But my point is that what we're discovering is we all know there's a substance abuse problem. If we could actually structure this industry so that there were more resources to attack substance abuse in all its forms, but this particular legalized form could become part of a funding mechanism that would help the whole society. That's something that we're seeing. We didn't see it at the beginning, but we now see it as a much more important part of the concept of commerce that helps the community.
And when sorry.
I was to say that was envisioned in the bill that was introduced by Senator Zuckerman last year. So some of that, if had it passed, some of that funding was going to be earmarked for.
We're talking about all of it.
Education, and which would, you know, and which would be great. But I'm just saying this is also not a new piece of the conversation.
And we're not responsible for it in any way. It goes into the legislature. But we do have some principles, and the principle is collaboration, healthy kids, opportunity for many, good regulation and taxation, and we may be recommending Senator Mazza, who some of you know, I know Bob does. He's very powerful in the Senate. He's on the Committee of Committees. What he said to me when I went to talk to him, he said, I'm afraid that all the legislators are going to want all the money for the general fund, because we all know the problems we have with the general fund. So what we are thinking of saying is, wait a minute. First, healthy communities and children. Put the money to that. We will give you money in the general fund, but that will come from job creation. So if we have a job, we have a number of 5,000 jobs, for instance. that money, the employee tax money, that goes into the general fund. So as we talk to the legislature, we want to be aware of what kind of communities we want to build in the future. We want opportunity for retention and recruitment of youth. When I was in that Economic Development Committee, that's all we talked about. How do we get young people back here? How do we give them opportunity for entrepreneurship? We are a state of entrepreneurs. We have infrastructure for entrepreneurship, which is not, it's unusual, how sophisticated we are. Bankers and professional mentors and ways to capitalize. We've been thinking about this because we've never had large corporations here, and we've had to, so we have a lineage of that.
There's a lineup of questions.
Hold on, well, just real quick, just so everybody knows, since I am filming here, I just want to be, but my name's Eli Harrington. I run a website called Vermont, just doing some public information projects. I'm just going to chop up a few clips, get some crowd shots, but if people do not want to be featured, they feel strongly, it's a public forum, but I want people to share freely, so if you do not want to be included on anything, please come see me afterwards. It's totally no problem at all. Otherwise, I'll try to be subtle about pointing this camera in all your faces.
So we don't want to talk at you, we want to get input from you. So you had your hand up?
Sure.
Yeah, I'm wondering if the legislation has an intention to allow for private individuals for their own purposes.
So that's a good question. What Stuart just outlined was his proposal for anyone can grow up to 10 by 10. It doesn't matter the number of plants. We would do it differently. As at our current thinking, we would say anyone can grow up to 6 plants. This will be debated. I'm sure this will be debated, and that's not because Stuart's wrong and we're right. It's because that's what other states have done. So we can at least say, here's how it works there. Don't worry so much about it.
Where does the supply come from? The retail store, in the aspect if you decide to go legal.
So again, I want to your question. We do envision that there would be, everyone could grow something for their own personal use. If you sold it, you would have to have a permit of some kind.
You do realize how much strains do come out, especially out of Vermont. Actually, strawberry cough happens to be one of the #1 strains that actually came from Vermont. There's definitely, I personally know of 250 strains that is available today.
So are you familiar with the medical dispensaries here?
Very familiar with
So they did aggregate certain numbers of those strains. Some of them have done genetic testing to understand that those 250 might only be 150 in fact, because some things were named the same thing when you do the DNA analysis.
There's so many different analyses when you deal with the CBD versus the THC that combines.
Right. So
Vermont has the best growing climate. It's analogous to Afghanistan.
So I mean, that was your, Stuart, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I would like to talk just a little bit about, well, 2 things. One is the elephant in the room, and that is rushing to a bill. The reason that we came into existence was when we saw the draft of the Zuckerman bill, we were appalled. It's overregulated and has prison terms for 6 plants. Actually for 3 plants, but 6 plants gives you 2 years.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And anything that has jail time for a penalty for marijuana will be opposed.
And you know what's in it?
Anything anything that's overregulated in that respect would be opposed. When everybody talks about regulation, that's, if a regulation is unenforceable, then it's not a regulation. If it is enforceable, how does it get enforced? And if we do that's really the tricky part. So I think that the regulation should be minimal, a license and a fee. If you don't have it, there's a problem, civil problem. And all the taxes should be at the end, the retail end, like it is with food.
Absolutely.
It's a plant. If we tax every step of the way, it's going to be too expensive. And if we do it all at the end, like a
market will still be growing super. You're only making it better.
Like a room and meals tax. In terms of
What percentage of the general fund is the rooms and meals tax? Because that's going to blossom when people come to Vermont.
Good question.
We'll give the state a phenomenal amount.
License fees will grow rapidly. The retail market is the way to go with the collaborative of the Vermont, and that is the Vermont way.
To tie this in with tourism, I mean, tax people that
we're not the closest.
So just to go back
the people that
to
are growing for the retail market.
just to go back to what we're talking about is that there is a mechanism of producing it, which Stuart has a framework. We also have a framework. Hopefully we can find common ground in that framework. Some of that would include anyone can grow some. If you don't sell it, then there's no illegality to that. But also that process of understanding how the industry is built and gets structured is not just about growing it, it's also about dispensing it, processing it, testing it, transporting it, financing it, banking it, insuring it, genetically breeding it. You know, this is the development of this industry, which some of you have been. I tell the story that I've been selling weed supplies for 35 years in my business, but without saying that's what I do, because I sell gardening equipment, right? And so, but if all of a sudden we could go out there and say we can really help you be effective in growing all year long in Vermont, that would be really good for my business as well. So there's many businesses that are going to benefit from this, but we got to figure out how to unlock the potential, which is, to me, Hinda mentioned the entrepreneurial underpinnings we have here. We do. How do we unlock that potential? And the fact that we've got thousands of people who already are experts here. How do we unlock their potential?
As a business owner in Manchester, I mean, I see tourism that comes into this town, and I would have no problem saying, all right, I'm going to quit being a studio artist and turn this into a grow and have a coffee shop out front. And, you know, you have people come in, like an Amsterdam-style setting, but you need IDs because it's a regulated thing. Yeah. And, you know, you keep talking about taxes and revenues, you know, you give it one price for Vermont licenses. You're from Vermont, you're paying X, but people, the tourism that comes to the state, that's a Vermont brand, you know, you come in with a New York license and you want to sit in my coffee shop and have a smoke, then, oh, you got New York, so you're paying a 25% more tax, and, I mean, the amount of revenues that would increase for out-of-state licenses.
That's a great point, but you know what? The legislature is going to control those answers. Excuse me, please. Let's just have the respect of listening when someone's talking. And I'll be happy to give you the floor in the next round. The idea of you becoming a business we have to figure out how that industry might in fact work. So David Zuckerman's legislation, I think, had the idea of a lounge as an authorizing, so it's a social gathering place, right? I don't think Jeanette's has anything like that, right?
No, that's not an idea that's already happened for the past 50 years in Amsterdam.
No, of course, I know, but it's not legal here. So the question is, how do we legalize that? So, because I agree with you, the tourism opportunity, Colorado is attracting skiers that were going to come to Vermont but are going to go there instead. So there's a business opportunity there. We have to think about the tourism benefits to us, and whether or not it's a Amsterdam coffee shop or whether or not it's a lounge or something else. We have to think about that, and we have to come up. I think we need to come up with a cohesive plan for that.
Well, as was mentioned in Brattleboro, the inns that are already doing this under the radar, where they're actually advertising quietly for cannabis people to come in and rent their places, are already going on in Vermont. And as we mentioned before, there's so many dealers here, the skiers, I don't think we're losing them. One of the things that was pointed out to me by Matt Simon of MPP the other day, and I'd forgotten this, was in the RAM report. It actually supports what Stuart is saying on the 10 by 10 grow or the canopy grow.
As one of the alternatives.
Yeah, but no, they did put it out there though, so that's something that may be palatable to our legislature.
Right. I mean, I think the challenge with that to some degree is if everyone can have 10 by 10 and there's no regulation, I think there would be a concern about leakage from that.
We are not, as Senator Benning said in St. Johnsbury, I'll go to him, we are not controlling it now. So whatever's going on now, there's no control. So you're going to get some control out of this.
Yeah. Right. You know, I mean, it's going to be there.
Yeah.
You can steer things, you can't control them.
And also, you're going to have the people in Vermont that are going to be growing that will do for the retail aspect of it. I believe that if you keep it in Vermont, the skiing, I go to a lot of mountains. That's what I do in the wintertime. And I'm telling you right now, you introduce marijuana in the state of Vermont, it's going to boom bigger than anything I've ever seen before. This market is too big for anybody to understand. You would know that. Once you go legal, it's going to be huge in those parts from
You're
tourism.
not going to have enough people to fill the jobs.
You won't have enough at all. Your numbers are off.
But you have to start somewhere.
You have to listen. All you have to do is you have to have the right people do the jobs. In the retail market, you need people that are educated and know what they're talking about.
Yeah. Can I just say that we visited Dan Smith, Vermont Technical College. He has all the infrastructure for workforce training. One of the things that is important to all of us is make sure people get workforce training for the jobs that they're going to be doing. He's very interested in that. The other thing that Vermont Technical College has, talking about partners and collaborative, they have an anaerobic digester, and we're looking at the production cycle of cannabis and what's left over and what we can use that leftover for zero waste in producing electricity.
I also know that people that actually grow marijuana, they'll know the process of it. This is a process that not everybody knows how to do. This is a process that takes a lot of time and effort.
Which process?
The process of growing,
yes,
production
the cycle,
of marijuana.
production cycle, yeah.
That process is not going to, I love how you say everybody in terms of the people that actually know how to do it. When you get into the retail market of it, they're going to accept the quality product that is a Vermont way, that's going to be used through the people that they know that can grow this quality product. This quality product is, it could be grown as a horrible product, or it could be grown as one of the best products.
So does everyone know Oaksterdam?
Yes, I know that college very well.
So there's someone I know here who just went out there to be schooled there.
Okay.
We ought to be doing that here. We ought to be creating our own educational framework.
It has to be hands-on. You're right.
Yes.
I agree with that.
So that's an example of what Vermont Technical College could all of a sudden solve their student enrollment problem if they really were able to create a cohesive program around that.
Well, there's someone here with a question who's been waiting.
Yeah, I just want to respond to something I heard over there where it's going to blow up so big it'll be bigger than anything we've ever seen.
Yes.
That's actually one of the problems that I hear from the legislature, is a concern that it will blow too fast. So the question is, how can we tamp that down a little bit and grow it over stages so
by keeping it local in our state,
by
keeping the men that this gentleman said, which was genius, by giving the quality product, purchasing lots, because anybody that grows knows you can't grow 6 plants. How are you going to grow 6 plants and get a good quality?
The plant count doesn't work.
The plant count does not.
And it's not going to bring people out of the woods. It doesn't work.
They're going to stay in the woods. Yeah. There's no way you're going to get out of the woods.
It's not going to change the culture.
To breed a good plant, to breed a good genetic plant, you need hundreds of plants to be able to make.
We're not talking genetic. Sorry. I mean, I know something.
Okay, let's say you take, for instance, you take the old good old 1995 Cannabis Cup winner, that White Widow, and you want to cross that.
I don't want to get into that level of detail, but to some people, they just want a little bit for their own pleasure and use. They don't want genetic development as their goal.
This is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about if you're into the retail market,
and the quality.
To be,
and we have it already.
A collaborative that you're part of, I believe. You're part of the collaborative.
Restaurants.
That works. That works well. You deal with 17 strains, I believe. The collaborative, who's I don't know who was involved with the medical medicinal marijuana. I believe they have 17 strains. They don't have Charlotte. They don't have Sour Tsunami. They don't have the high CBD strains that are saving children's lives.
Yeah, well, let's bring it up. I mean, I'm in the industry, with the equipment and all that, supplies, and like you said, I think the plant count, yeah, great, but 6, I mean, throw a number out there for these people, for the legislation, something, and yeah, you want more, then like you said, apply for, I want 12, I want 4,800. But I think the 6, just to say, hey, keep it small, you know what I mean? Right now I deal with a lot of people, they come in, they just want a couple plants, equipment to do that. So I think that's a fair number, but I like the idea where you can then add on, not come in and say, oh, everybody can grow 100 plants.
So what Stuart was saying, I think, was whatever you can grow in 10 by 10. I don't think everyone wants a full 10
well,
by 10.
I think, realistically, I think a lot of these people that don't understand it are scared of these giant numbers. You're going to go to the legislation, everybody can grow, this size room, 300 plants. You know, and that's gonna freak them out unless you put in, like you said, for the right permits, you know?
You, and then you.
I do think that 6 would probably be too low, because if you're saying plants, are you defining them as starts or mature plants? You know, and if you're a regular gardener going for tomatoes, you don't start, you may get 6 mature tomato plants, but you probably start with 25 or 30 tomato starts before you achieve it. So I think that if they're going to make such a low determination, they have to specify that this is mature.
I wouldn't get stuck on that number, because I think that's going to evolve as logic comes out.
I know people in California who've had medical marijuana licenses, and they're allowed 25 mature plants plus starts plus this plus that. So when you say 6 is a number used in other states, I don't know where that comes from. Maybe it's in the legal states, but certainly not in the ones doing medical where they already allow more.
The current Vermont regulation on medical is 7.
No, sir, it's
No,
nine.
9.
Two mature,
2 mature and 7
The
juvenile.
ones that are mature are only the ones that you're plucking today.
Right,
So it works out.
okay, sorry, you've had it.
That's also-
The definition by law of mature is anything that's flowering to the naked eye.
Yes.
That is
So in other words, when you see
definition
the
by
hairs
Vermont
come up,
law.
By Vermont law.
it's, that's what my Vermont.
There are growers in the room here, we actually know how to do this, so, you know.
Go ahead.
So, my name is Laura Subin. I'm the director of the Vermont Coalition to Regulate Marijuana, and I'm lucky to count a number of you among our members, and we work very closely with Matt Simon and the Marijuana Policy Project, and we've been doing this organizing work for about 1.5 years now, and I have had hundreds of conversations around the state with policymakers, legislators, administrators, executive directors of nonprofits, business representatives, to try to promote the simple platform that marijuana prohibition is a failed policy and should be replaced with a more sensible system. I think probably have a lot of support for that idea in this room. You would be amazed how much resistance there continues to be around the state to that premise alone, and that's the end of what the coalition is putting forth, and no details of specifics of a bill, and there continue to be a lot of resistance to that simple premise alone, and so many people in leadership positions around the state that agree with that premise, but still won't go public with their agreement to that position. So I do feel like we're making huge progress. I have a lot of optimism. I think there's a lot of room. And I am excited about all of these ideas in the Vermont way. Personally, I'm 100% behind it. I also have sort of been bathed in some of the realities of the political climate isn't as rosy as we might hope. And so I think that we should, while we dream about what we would like it to look like, also consider what would be a step forward in the right direction. And so one of the things that has not come into the conversation in this room yet today, and I know you haven't overlooked it, and it's just not where your starting place is, but the fundamental human rights and civil rights violations being promulgated by prohibition are a huge part of this issue. And repealing prohibition, even with a very imperfect law, could be viewed as a step forward for some of those human rights and civil rights issues. So
well, we would like to.
It is the final civil rights battle, because it was created in an apartheid, racist United States to give white guys jobs busting black guys smoking reefer.
Yeah, I would like to. One of the things that's going on here, the elephant in the room, is I think we're rushing. The idea of being there first, the idea of doing it now, the idea of in order to do that we have to compromise and do what the state police want and do what the psychologists want for the children and do this and that. We don't need to have it this year. We really don't. We need, if we're going to put a good bill into effect, I don't think we can do it in 3 or 4 months. I think we need to, I don't think we can do it in a year. I think we ought to sit back and say, if it happens, let's try for the best, but if it doesn't work out, let it ride.
Stuart, we're doing our best work, the collaborative, and coming to all of you. We're doing it now because we feel it's important now, because And don't forget, it's iterative, and it's going to, even if it passes, you're going to have a year of rules, which makes it 2017. Then you're going to have 2 or 3 years for people to understand the rules and how people are going to do it. So you're talking about 2018 or something to even begin this. So this is a start.
Well,
so, and we're not going to get it
6
right.
months.
We're going to get something, and then people are going to say, wait, this doesn't work. Come back. Let's get it better and better and better. This is a continuous improvement industry.
This is what happened with the medical marijuana bill. We rushed one through, years later, 10 years later, it still doesn't work. No,
really?
It still doesn't work.
Really? We didn't do it right the first time. We need to do it right the first time.
We can't even get PTSD on it.
Yeah.
I mean, you know.
I know, I'm with you 100%.
So we need to do it right the first time.
I don't believe that.
You can't rush.
Well, I just don't believe that we're better off with a bad bill than no bill. I think we're better off with no bill. Because what we have has been working for the last 40 years. It's been working in Vermont. Maybe not for the state, but it's been working for the people of Vermont. And that's really what it's about.
I'm sorry, I hear what you're saying. I disagree on some level because it hasn't been working for, well, before decrim, for the black people that were getting arrested at more than 4 times the rate of white people in the state. It hasn't been, it's not working post decrim for someone who's living in poverty and gets the $200 fine, and that's a week's worth of wages for someone working at minimum wage. So there are possibly steps forward for justice that could be taken in incremental steps without throwing the baby away with the bathwater, so to speak. So I think that there are harms of prohibition that could be corrected and should be, and to my way of thinking, it's way too late. We've taken way too long to address those rather than rushing.
Right, so if we can just expand decrim,
right, it might be easier
then we're there.
to address that.
Decrim is going to have the fines that are going to disproportionately impact low-income people.
The fines are up to the legislature, not up to...
If we can't change decrim, why do we think we can legalize it? I mean, really, if we can't get the fines away from decrim, how are we going to do it, legalize it?
Okay,
I have medical doctors right now that are livid that they're being told how to prescribe and what to use this plant for. Okay, the 3-person medical panel, from what I understand, is no longer in existence at this time. The DPS is making decisions based on their idea of what a patient should be. If you put down one thing that's not on the list, even if you're on a renewal, this happened last week, okay, you get refused for your card. People are not getting their cards, cancer patients are not getting their cards on time because the doctors are so afraid to confirm a diagnosis that the patient has to go outside the law to get their medicine. This is simply not, it's not functioning. So again, this is what we're up against already with this bureaucracy.
Right. Find doctors is hard to find in Vermont. You have to go to New Hampshire.
Yeah.
Get a doctor.
Go ahead.
They're getting arrested. Yeah, I'm hearing a lot of people talk about a lot of problems and a lot of potential solutions and benefits here. One of the big ones I heard from this side of the room were all the people in Vermont that are not employable right now because of criminalization. If we can decriminalize quickly this term, then we can work out the details of everything else over time. I think there's a real benefit to an incremental approach that gives you the time to build the industry.
Laura may have the best perspective on that. What do you think? Is that something that could, I mean, there's a way, first of all, a bit of background. Shumlin is for it. He's a lame duck. He'll be out. Shap Smith, who's going to run, is now for it. We have 2 Republicans who are probably not for it. It's not out of the question that they could be elected. If we don't take this window of opportunity, whether it's improved decriminalization or whether it's legalization, we might be losing several more years. So that's just a point of view. I don't know if you
And I do know that's the point of view of the Marijuana Policy Project, which for those of you that don't know is one of the large national organizations that was key to getting legalization passed in Colorado. And their focus is specifically on changing laws. That's their narrow focus within this much obviously larger question, issue, and that's their position. They think that 2016 is a really important window of opportunity in Vermont, and so that's one of the main states that they're focusing on in the country right now. So I think it's fair to say that that would be their perspective, that it would be it could be a serious lost opportunity if it doesn't happen this year.
What's your
Something
perspective?
doesn't happen.
Because you have both improved justice issues and legalization.
So my personal perspective is that a step forward towards freedom and justice would be a positive thing, and that we need to build a law that has enough flexibility. And I hear loud and clear how badly the medical marijuana law was done in Vermont and how stuck everybody is in the consequences of that.
I mean, everything
it's a
they
disaster.
could possibly do to make it better.
It's a disaster. And I believe that we have a lot of constituencies, empowered constituencies right now talking about this issue, and we have information coming from Colorado and Washington. A lot of people probably know a delegation went to Colorado to get information. The state legislators were just getting toured around Washington by the Marijuana Policy Project to gather information. We have your effort, which I think is hugely important to what might come out. We have what's the GovOps committee did last year. So there are conversations about how to do this better than what has happened in the other states that have done it. I think there's a lot of room to make a lot of mistakes, and so if in my dream world you build in some protections, like Hinda was saying, this is going to be, this, no matter what happens, many things are not going to be decided for a number of years, but some things that could happen immediately is people would stop getting cited for small amounts of marijuana, and people could have almost every proposed legislation that I've heard of has some home cultivation, so you could have some protection against criminal legal system interference with a small amount. And I know the growing numbers are not right and all of that, and a lot of those came from based on what they think they could get passed, and it's not a good place for them to come from, but that's where they came from, those numbers of plants and kind of things. But I do think that there could be some immediate improvements for freedom, for civil rights, for beginning to build this industry, to keep to take the conversation out of this adversarial, should we legalize or should we not, but get to legalization and then be more thoughtful about how it should be designed and implemented.
I think we have an opportunity, as we said, to do something significant, and we also have an opportunity to be forward-thinking and long-range planning. Because if we're only a year ahead of New York or Massachusetts, we're not going to gain the economic advantage. If we are 10 years ahead, so it'll take them 10 years to catch up to where we are, you will hear something in the history books called the Vermont Renaissance. You will hear something in the history books about Bernie Sanders being elected president over everybody's expectations. And we will literally be on the cutting edge of change in America. Because you know why? I came out and I looked at that sculpture out front and I filmed it. Take a look at it when you go back and you understand why I'm here today as an American standing up for liberty.
Yeah, and I hear what you're saying, but Vermont's going to be behind the 8 ball. Mass is going, next election, Maine's going, so I think, I just hope that Vermont follows through. And
so there's probably 5 states with, this is according to the Marijuana Policy Project, with really viable ballot initiatives for the 2016 legislative session, and then there's Vermont and Rhode Island and Maryland that have legislative prospects in the works that are realistic.
Ohio's introduced to them also.
Yes. The Marijuana Policy Project isn't ranking them in the highest likelihood of success.
I was shocked that they introduced it.
Yeah, so that's one thing. And I think Time Magazine came up with the same 5 states.
Bob, and then
just heard you say that Vermont has the quality, though, even if the other states were to do it. And that's kind of the whole reason we're here today, is to talk about if we're going to do this. Actually, I think it's beyond if, I think it's when we do this. How do we do this so that we position Vermont and the Vermont brand, and so that we do this as not just something to do to keep people out of the judicial system, which, by the way, should be about reason enough, but should it not be reason enough, how do we do it so that it's an economic driver, just like foliage and maple syrup and the other things that this state, and cheese, that this state is noted for? How do we do that? We do that by what you've been talking about all afternoon, which is a level of quality that Maine and Massachusetts isn't going to have, Colorado's not going to have. And that's why it'll be an economic driver, number one. Number two, although I'm sensitive to what you're saying, Stuart, let's get this right even if it takes another 10 years.
I'd say 10 years.
No, I know.
But 10 months maybe.
10 months.
Instead of,
well, yeah, I think that,
excuse
me, I think that what we have here is a very unique harmonic convergence of things happening in the state of Vermont. And we have a lame duck governor. We've had a speaker who's been resistant, who's come around. We have the majority leader in the Senate, Joe Benning, who is supportive. Yes.
Republican, by the way.
Republican. He's a minority leader. Sure, Dick Mazza's not ever going to vote for this.
That's not true.
But
He didn't say he wasn't.
I know, of course not, but he will when the time comes. But be that as it may, if we can get Dick Mazza, that'd be great. But if not, I'm not so sure we're going to need him. But I do think that the effort that's been put forth by yourself and by this group is what's going to help make the difference. It's the old, if people will lead, the leaders will follow, and that's kind of where we are right now in helping the policymakers of the state of Vermont come to the place of legalization. Once we're there, and I'm sensitive to your comments about it's the medical marijuana not being perfect and not working very well, but you got to start somewhere. You got to have a program before you.
We started 10 years ago with the medical marijuana, though, and 10 years later, we're still.
But it's, and let me just speak to it. There's still, as pointed out by
Laura,
a level of resistance in the state of Vermont. So this process is going to be about the art of the possible. It's going to be about the art of the possible. And once it's there and going, medical marijuana hasn't risen to the level of we need to fix this to our policymakers. But I do think that if we go the next step.
Yes, it has.
Well,
I beg to differ. Talk to some patients, please.
Okay, well, we can talk about that. But I do think that once we've gone through the process of legalization, the whole dialogue steps up. And then if we have the issues of growing quality plants as being impeded, then we can deal with that. Maybe even deal with it administratively.
I agree with you.
You have a question? Did you?
I was actually blocking the light from going in my eyes.
You just bought a very expensive antique. You're moving your body like that.
Your guys' key question was how to regulate it, how to get it introduced into this great state. I lived in Long Island most of my life. I'm telling you right now, anytime I saw something that said "Made in Vermont,"
yeah, you loved it.
That's right.
You loved it. That's all you have to do.
Yeah.
You bring the retail market in, you use your friends of Vermont to do it for you, to make the quality product for you in this state that I'm telling you grows perfectly.
I'm
the
no
climate.
marketing genius, but this is called the Green Mountain State.
Right.
Exactly.
We're going to lose the I am Vermont strong license plate.
No problem.
Say I am Vermont green.
I think there's a lot of passion in the room, and that's all really great, but we only have another 33 minutes, I think, and we've been really stuck in the same thing. I think there was a couple of really good things that you guys brought up in the presentation that, how do we keep it local that maybe we should move the conversation towards? I mean, I think we want to keep out a lot of big businesses, so there's going to be a lot of people looking at our state from around the country, so maybe that's something where we should head towards in this discussion.
We're not Monsanto friendly here.
Right, so we're not Monsanto friendly, but in St. Johnsbury we talked about maybe only giving licenses to those individuals that had lived in the state for 4 years or 5 years, residents, and not just moved into the state, applied for a driver's license, and now you're a resident. I think.
No, you do that.
Well, that's how you do it in Vermont anyway.
Colorado did that very, very well, and we're looking at a lot of policies in Colorado and other places that are working well, and we're going to take those as recommendations, so we can start with state of the art where other states are. And believe me, it's just the beginning. So that's what we're trying to do.
And I think that's really important to remember. It's this is a first step, and I agree that the medical marijuana was a failure. I totally get that, but we need to move forward because there's no jobs in the state. Let's face it. I mean, I graduated from college in 2008. 90% of my graduating class left. Nobody stayed because there's no industry here. There's no real job. There's no jobs unless you want to work in the tourism industry, which I do, and I can tell you it's terrible. We need to create jobs. So I think it's important that we push this thing forward. We should do it really smart, but there's a lot of passion in this room. There's a lot of great ideas. I think if we collectively get together, rather than kind of coming at each other, I think that we can kind of get something through. And the Shap Smith thing, I think, is huge. So I think the time is now.
Yeah.
So.
I would agree and emphasize with this point about jobs, and if the legislator wants to look at something, the flight of youth.
Yes.
I can't tell you how many young people I personally know who moved to California to grow herb.
Yeah.
You know, we lose a lot of young people and a lot of economic force. We're turning into an old state with a demographic that's very senior.
We're the oldest state behind Maine as far as our demographics.
If we enact this soon, it would be a driving force towards retaining and bringing in youth.
So we all agree that that's sort of what we ought to be doing. The question really, and honestly, this group is passionate about progressing. There's some caution about doing it too fast, which I appreciate. But there's also, as Laura knows, a lot of resistance out there. So in some ways what we have to do is make sure we appreciate that resistance and we can counter that resistance, and we have answers to the big obstacles that are put up. So that's the defensive side, right? Then there's an offensive side. And the offensive side is, how do we structure this so this excellence can be created? So one of the issues, if you look at maple syrup or even cheese, there are mechanisms to assure that the Vermont brand means something. So when you're in Long Island and you buy that Vermont, it's not just because it's from Vermont, it's hopefully there's a quality that is expressed there.
It's the state that gives it.
So we have to make sure that as we go into the marketplace, that we can continue to elevate that quality. And to me, that is about openly being able to share what works. I don't care whether it's genetics or the growing, the cultivation process or the processing process. We need to continue to elevate the concept of this industry becoming superior. And so that's really what we are about. We started off saying we recognize that conclusion. We can't succeed in agriculture selling commodities in Vermont. That's why every successful part of our agricultural sector is a specialty niche product that imbues itself with Vermontness. We have to do that with this as well.
Well, I would like to say we grow some of the best marijuana in the world right here, right now. We don't have to grow into excellence. We're there.
We don't pump oil.
And if we don't include those people,
I mean,
then we're
people
not
know
going to
how
have
to
the
do it.
excellence.
So don't yell at me.
I keep hearing, how do we get that excellence? We've had it for the last 40 years. And that's all we're saying is let those people get part. If you don't, they're not going to go away. They didn't go away for the laws now. They're not going to go away for whatever laws they make next.
But if all of a sudden like Shumlin is against edibles because he's seen what's happened in Colorado because we don't have any clear protocols.
His mother had a bad experience.
Well, whatever it is.
Trust me, you were there. I had permission from his father. I was caregiver to his father for 7 years before he passed.
Testing is key.
Okay, an expert.
I'm good friends with the family.
All I'm saying is to take it to that next level, because we don't have a cohesive edibles understanding in this state, and we need that in terms of what strains do what kind of things and what kind of qualities to have what kind of outcomes. We need that understanding.
That understanding comes with testing.
Testing, exactly.
Exactly. So what is the testing mechanism that we're going to use? Because that ought to be part of our legislative approach. We want the highest quality. Make sure our labs and our testing facilities are helping deliver that.
So testing facilities have to be.
Well, how much of the farmers market food is tested?
But can I?
You know, I mean,
Joe, you want to say something?
I was going to say, as far as testing, I work I'm a consultant in the cannabis industry out in Oregon. You don't buy pot out west without it already independently tested. It tells you exactly what the THCs are, what your cannabinoids are.
100%.
It tests for pesticides, it tests for bug shit, all the other stuff.
If you open up a bottle of Tylenol, you read the directions on it.
This is important.
I think that if we're going to set a standard of excellence, you need to have, and my wife thinks the state should do it, but you need to have an independent body that comes in and and test it. And test it for organic. There's a thing, the Craft Cannabis Initiative. They have a thing called best growing practices. Best practices, you can't be in this program unless you adhere to these best growing practices. And I think that's a lot with like the Cabot or like the co-ops that we're talking about. You get into the co-op, you show that you can provide the product, you have it independently verified. This way there's no one can say, yeah, you're just rigging the system, you know, to make your stuff look good. And you have some, you know, and I mean, I know 3 or 4 different companies. I mean, I know the people that do it. I mean, we can, Kennever and OG Labs.
So let me offer you what we understand, or what is happening here in Vermont. Because there is one of the leading food safety lab testing organizations called Via Diagnostics in Colchester. And they are moving into this cannabis space. They are looking at trying to figure out how to provide this kind of quality control. So what I want to, I've been at meetings before where the answer is, we already know how to do it. We're already excellent. Okay, but when you're in the marketplace competing with other people, if we could elevate that standard clearly and define it as they are. I mean, Oregon's way ahead of us in that sense. Even Colorado's ahead of us in that sense.
The only reason why you feel that they're ahead of you is because they have facilities that are testing that you can do.
Well, but I'm saying,
I actually know growers that are in this room that have tested product that of very high THC CBD levels. Therefore, once you put it in a legal market, once you put it in a retail market, and you get these things tested, this is going to show. It's all going to be there for us to see.
Fair enough, but so all I'm saying is, it's like organic certification. Vermont was one of the centers of the universe 42 years ago in creating organic certification, right? And that has really created a niche that's been very important to our dairy market, to our vegetables, to our maple, you know. So that organic certification has been an important step that we took to create advantage in the marketplace. It's the same kind of thing I think we're talking about here. And I'm not saying organic certification, but I'm saying some kind of certification that says our growing protocols should be elevated above anyone else's.
There are 2 ways to grow marijuana. I mean, there's plenty of ways to grow, but the organic way, having it put into any market, that should be tested and put as organic. I think you should do that because there are 2 different types. You can have synthetically grown marijuana, you can have organic grown marijuana.
Well, one of the ideas we had when we visited Dan Smith at Vermont Technical College is on their land there's going to be built a lab, a very expensive lab by the state that combines environmental testing and agricultural testing. What if that lab became, what if a state started doing the testing or oversaw private people that did testing, but the state oversaw that process? These are the kinds of systems that we are thinking about, because yes, it would be wonderful in a way for marketing. I'm just thinking about marketing. If you said that the state of Vermont has a system of testing and the state is involved, it might have.
Just to be clear, Nevada already does it this way.
Yes.
So again, this is a place, if we are smart about going out to looking at mechanisms that already exist that we can import, we don't have to reinvent the wheel there. So I have one question for you growers out there. Does anyone know about hemp russet mites?
The mites that are involved in hurting the plants?
Scary what people use to get rid of
I mentioned that
needs to be in place, because they're putting chemicals on these plants that I wouldn't spray in a third world country.
So
that's the testing that needs to be in place.
Does anyone know how to control it organically?
Safe or so?
There's
temperature below 73 degrees.
Okay, just wondered how sophisticated
CO2 enrichment over 10,000 parts per million.
Yeah, sulfur is the only thing that I've found.
CO2 enrichment over 10,000 parts per million.
That's exactly right.
CO2.
And you put it in a greenhouse, you put CO2 over 10,000 parts per million.
So I mean, do that little piece of content was really valuable, I think, to recognize that even though we may have great growers, even though that we have a lot of sophistication here, the idea of actually Vermont saying, and we're going to create a protocol that everyone who produces is at least understanding of and maybe certified for, then we can elevate this industry to a level of quality that is different from other states.
What I would see is that the quality growers that have been alluded to here this afternoon
would be the ones who would be participating in the standards to be set.
Yes.
Yes.
Great.
Absolutely.
Quality growers.
Yes.
I mean, you've got the quality growers saying, this is how you grow. I mean, bring them, the thing of it is, they're in the woods today, bring them out of the woods and bring them into the marketplace.
So how do you do that? That's what we're talking about.
And the only way to do that is to take the gun away from their head that's being put to them by the authorities.
Right.
You legalize it,
Exactly.
and then you bring that community to the table and have them work with the labs and the community to create the products that we're
So
looking
here's
to
where
create.
Vermont can excel, as Hinda mentioned, the whole kind of idea of collaboration. So if we could, if we had a mechanism to bring that expertise in, to have Vermont Technical College and what they're about to do be supportive and applied to that, then we have the co-creation of our academic people, our practical people, creating something that's really differentiated. But that's an idea that we ought to be trying to figure out how to bring into the legislative process so that this sense of quality can be elevated.
If you don't bring the existing capacity into the light, it's not going to work. Vermont has a huge capacity to grow quality cannabis, and it can scale up as needed. If those growers don't fear for their lives or fear for their freedom, they're not going to be part of any system you guys create.
So we're not going to create it. Legislature's going to create it. But if it was legal,
yeah.
So we're all talking about the same thing: the empowerment of our current expertise and potential and brand to be elevated and create jobs for those young people that are leaving. I mean, that's what we want to do. The question is, structurally, how do we do that? So a lot of our conversation so far has been about the cultivation side. We also need to understand the distribution side, the value-added side, the R&D side, those other components of this. Well, the taxes will come. I mean, if you can do...
Retail taxes will be the taxes.
Well, I mean, 280E is killing the industry. So, I mean, that's...
What's killing the industry?
What'd you say?
280E is killing the industry. Like, 280E is the
280E,
federal...
right.
Right, 280E is the federal tax law that says that if you are in the cannabis industry, anything that is cannabis related cannot be written off and will be taxed in full. So you're basically taxed at about 90%.
And Senator Leahy knows this. We do have Welch and Leahy. I don't know about Bernie, he's running for president, but those people who are seriously working now for us, they're absolutely aware of 280E. Go ahead.
Just to add on the tax point, Colorado did just announce that they doubled their tax receipts in 1 year.
Wow.
Well, no, they hit a home run.
280E's got to get solved, or none of us, doesn't matter how good our pot is, how many people come, it doesn't matter, you'll get taxed out.
You'll see a little
I think a basic couple-step approach is to follow the coalitions. The expertise is there. If the gun wasn't at the head, you would be flooded with experts. Vermonters tend to be very, I mean, I didn't even know this meeting was going on. I came for a FEMA meeting. I had no idea this was going on. I mean, there's no way. And a lot of people would never dream of publicly coming forth. Not only will you stop having as many criminals, I dare to say you'll have a huge increase in citizenship and politician representation. Because a lot of people have just held back on, oh, no, the government's going to look at me and I'm just not going to be involved. I'm not going to run for public office or anything else. There are plenty of experts. If it's decriminalized, if the gun is away, the state will have all the resources it needs to create good legislation.
What's interesting how quickly in some states, Washington, Colorado, the things have flipped when legalization happened. So in some sense, maybe we have this pent-up potential that we should be trying to figure out how, because I don't even know if that's been something, I don't know how you quantify that to the legislature, but it would be an interesting, maybe you've done that.
I want to ask a question though. I'm kind of confused. Legalization means to me it's legal. I think we're talking about re-regulation, rewriting the regulations. We're not really talking about legalization.
Well, is alcohol legalized?
No, we're basically making good quality ketchup from our tomato plants.
Right.
And we are certifying that we have the best fucking ketchup in the world.
Right, but there is, you know, you know, to the extent that it's regulated, you know, that's the extent where, you know, the freedom to do it is cut, and that defines the legal parameters. So if we're talking about legalization, we're talking about repeal. I think what we're really talking about is redefining the regulations to provide a framework.
So
that's what it seems like a model.
So Stuart, what would you consider the alcohol industry today?
Regulated industry.
If we can get, we'll be lucky.
I would consider that a regulated
industry. We're not
industry.
going to legalize this.
Right, that's what I'm saying. So let's not give that illusion here.
Well, I am an attorney, and there is a distinction as far as the legal language goes. So there is some meaning in saying that it's legalized and regulated rather than against the criminal law.
Right, but then it's legalized and regulated.
Right,
it's not
but
legalized.
I'm saying there is in the language of the legal system, there is a distinction between legal or illegal, even if it's legal and regulated.
Right.
So, and decriminalization is a legal never land. That really doesn't mean anything. That means it's still illegal, but that it's a civil sanction instead of a criminal sanction. So that's another reason, in my opinion, that resting on what people are calling decriminalization is sort of it's not tenable. It has no solid grounding in the language of the law.
That's really helpful. So, you would recommend, given that you put a couple years into this, that we would want to legalize and regulate.
Yeah, well, personally, I like the tomatoes idea, but no, I think, yes.
It's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen. And so professionally, yes, I think that legalize and regulating is much better than relying on a system of quote-unquote decriminalization.
I would go along with that, but I think just throwing out the word legalization implies everything's going to be okay.
Yeah. So we're looking at it's free enterprise, America.
No.
No.
I'm out. Totally gone.
Well, again, alcohol is not free enterprise. You have to have a license.
Tomatoes are not free.
100% agree with that. Absolutely agree with that. But I'm thinking more, it would be so simple if we just opened up retail, used Vermonters to supply the demand that comes in from tourism, from locals, from
politically
everywhere.
Not tenable. It won't work.
Just
No,
when
you can't do
everybody
it.
quits
It'd be
their
simple,
minimum
but it
wage
won't
jobs,
work.
become a marijuana entrepreneur, and
But only the strong will survive in a marijuana.
But in the
that's right.
meantime,
That is
you're going to
very
cripple the industries that will pay the Republicans. to
I was in
oppose it.
construction in 2001. I started my business. There was 7,000 construction workers in Long Island. The only reason why I stayed in construction business was because I was the strong. I survived. That's the same way it's going to work in any industry.
That's right.
The businessman, the man that cares about his job, the
we're
man that
running
cares
out of
about his
time.
passion, the man that wants to do good, the man, he will be the one to make it. That's what America's all
That's what
about.
entrepreneurship is all about.
Thank you very much. Good job.
But we're talking about moving from a no entrepreneurship allowed at all to something
When's the
allowed.
next step? This would be the next step.
This is the next step.
Yeah. As I listen to everybody in the room, I'm hearing about a lot of complexity, a lot of different elements that have to come together, and a lot of collaboration that has to happen. And we have a time press here because we have a session coming up. I don't think we'll be able to solve these problems before the legislation needs to go to the legislature.
I would agree.
I think we need to split our focus here. Think about legalization, number one, for individual consumption and growth, and that might be a 6-plant limit or a 9-plant limit or something that's viable for individual use. And then looking at the rulemaking process in the years forward to deal with all these other collaborative complexity issues. So we want legislation that sets up the rulemaking process so we have a regulated, legalized process. 2 tiers, 2 points, staged.
So just to because actually that was something that occurred to me half hour ago. Maybe we should be advancing legalization, Stuart. That is, anyone can grow a little bit, whether it's your system or some other system, at which point we also have opened the door, like in a sense, medical marijuana opened the door to the legalization regulation conversation. So maybe that's a strategy to move forward, and maybe there's even a process of saying, okay, we will allow the commercialization and taxation of this crop. We don't know how it's going to happen yet. That'll happen over the next period of time. What do you think, Laura?
Yeah, sounds good to me.
That sounds good. It's like, that also makes some sense, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I like that. Thank you.
And that's how it goes. I mean, the legislative process is complicated but pretty simple. They will come up with an idea, they'll take input from the public, they'll hear this crowd and they'll hear the anti-this crowd.
Yeah.
And they will put forth a piece of legislation. But the agencies that will oversee it will be the ones that will put forth rulemaking. That happens with almost every single piece of significant legislation. And frankly, rulemaking can work in your advantage or work not to your advantage. And I think that that's where the effort of your group, this group, all groups, all people.
So everyone has heard. Let's pretend we are one entity that is trying to advance a point of view in the legislature based on everything you've heard. Would that make sense to everybody here?
Yeah.
That we take a step, we take two steps. One step is everyone can grow some amount to be defined, but and we can negotiate what that is. Second step is when you start getting into selling it, there will be a whole set of guidelines and protocols that generates highest quality. But in that process, it's going to take some time. The legislature will take leadership in the rulemaking process to do that. Does anyone say, no, I can't live with that?
Everybody, everyone has.
Does anyone, just any negatives on that idea?
All I'm saying is, I'm not the youngest person, but I'm definitely younger of the group, and I can tell you that people of our age, they want things done. Mm-hmm. And if you're not getting things done, they're not going to stay here. So you asked the question about how to keep the youth in our state, how to keep New England to be, this would be like the first state in New England, the East Coast, to legalize marijuana in the state of Vermont. I'm telling you, in my head, my dream, that would be incredible. And that would,
but you're talking about legalized for sale, for commercialization.
Regulated, legalized, sale. I'm talking all that factors. If we keep waiting and keep pushing it off and only trying to do one thing, we have to make.
No, what we just said was legalized. Anyone can grow some amount. That's called real legalization.
What I'm saying is stepping up the game.
Let's move it forward.
Then have a timetable.
Bob, you know this world.
Step 2.
I spent an inordinate amount of my life in the Vermont legislature.
As a lobbyist, say it out loud.
As a lobbyist. I was a member for 6 years, and then I was a lobbyist for 20 years.
Yeah, right. We like them anyway, don't we?
There's a reason why the push is, as you heard the speaker say, if we're going to do this, do it early in the session. There's a variety of reasons, not the least of which the parties that are going to be in place over the next 12 to 18 months are also the same parties that are going to be overseeing the rulemaking process. And so what you don't want to get caught in is one administration that says, okay, this is a go, and the rulemaking's not done yet,
makes it hard.
And you've got a change of administration, and now all of a sudden the agency is like, well, we're not quite such a hurry to make this happen. So if it's going to happen, they're right, it should happen fairly quickly, and then the pressure needs to be applied to the agencies and through the legislature, the Joint Rules Committee, which meets regularly, will put pressure on the agency to let's get these rules out and get them out now. And that's where the public input can play a role.
We got a lot of input.
And we will make this an issue for the election when Chap wants to become the Democratic. Matt Dunn, he's also for this. So for the candidates, this is absolutely something that they have to respond. Phil Scott is all for job creation. Has he moved over to cannabis? Who knows? I have great faith in Phil Scott, and maybe he'll get it, that this is an opportunity. I don't know. What do you think? What is your guess?
You get a coin?
Yeah, right, exactly. So we don't know.
I don't know.
So just thank you, Bob, for that additional perspective of there's no guarantees on the rulemaking process as politics winds change, right? So what's interesting about other states is citizens said, we want it to be legalized, we'll vote on it, it happened. The legislature says, we have a mandate to do something now, right? That's not what we have here. So in a sense, we have to figure out how to operate within our realities of timing and politics, etc.
And a system that works well for the people it's intended to work well for.
So, any expert advice on that?
Yeah, call your legislators.
Yeah.
Call your legislators.
Pay attention to what committee your representative sits on, because some committees are going to be more influential in this process than others, so look that up.
Judiciary is going to be a big one.
Judiciary is going to be a big committee.
Dick Sears needs to hear from
Right.
people in Manchester.
That's what I'm about to say. After years of saying he's not going to allow for a hearing on legalization, Senator Dick Sears
Yes.
finally said, yes, I'm going to have a hearing. So everybody needs to lobby their legislators. Steve Barry is in favor of legalization. Dick Sears is not a fan of it because he is very much, you know, he agrees with law enforcement. In the old school, exactly. He thinks it's a bad thing because he's dealt with addiction issues and he listens to law enforcement. But if everybody talks to their legislators, Cynthia Browning, you know, she says, well, I think we should wait. I don't think she's in favor of it, but she should still be talked to. If enough people, enough of us, talk to our legislators, tell one of our friends or 5 of our friends, talk to Cynthia Browning, talk to Dick Sears, talk to Brian Campion.
We just met with him, and he said that he's for it.
Good.
With certain, you need certain questions
Good, because he
answered,
listens very carefully to Dick Sears.
Yes, he does. So let me tell you about Sears. I worked with him for 10 years in appropriations. He is very concerned about our youth. He comes from a place of recovery services. He was a counselor and everything. In our proposal, we're thinking about, guess what? We're going to raise money for recovery services, for education for our children, not only cannabis, alcohol and heroin. We have a terrible education process for our kids. They don't know what they're getting into when they're 18. They don't know what the choices are. If we say to him, our proposal is that you're going to get $5 million more from the taxes for your recovery services, that's going to weigh heavily on what he cares about. As far as our ability to communicate, we're going out to see what these senators and representatives care about. We're going to use it as a headline to say, we also care about our children. We want healthy children. So and when you speak to your senators, it's not real, it's about legalization and regulation, but it's also about how do we raise the money we need to create healthy communities, because right now in the general fund, all those areas are being cut. And they can't tax their way enough higher to get those coffers filled in this area. So this is like strategic relationships. As you go and speak to your senators and your representatives, find out what they care about. And then have a counter to say, yes, we agree with you and we're helping you by this proposal. So that's what...
I agree with you to a point, but we're talking here about education. And the first part of education, I think, is that marijuana is not heroin, even though they're both Schedule I drugs. It's not an opiate, it is an alcohol. And the more we couple it with that,
with alcohol,
with alcohol, with any kind of drug,
it is a matter of, that's what's going to sell with the legislators. We can
I'm not talking about that. I'm saying we ought to also be starting to educate that it is not the same.
Right.
And we have to break that association if we're going to move forward in the rules over the years. So we somehow or another have to handle that delicately enough to say, yes, we will fund it, but it is not a drug in that sense.
It's not detrimental, it's actually helpful.
It's healing.
Right, that legalizing this can stop people who are addicted to heroin and get opiates will move. I know people who are on OxyContin and then went to cannabis for painkillers. It can, yeah.
Okay.
I did it. I had a prescription.
Everyone in the room is done.
I mean,
I've never taken a prescription.
I'm
got 2 minutes.
I know, we have to wrap it up. So,
can I just say one thing? I've been at all the meetings, I've been beating up on the dispensaries, and I got set straight, and I'd like to set it straight. It is not the dispensary's fault. I was straightened out by someone who was straightened out by a legislature. It is not the dispensary's jobs to help patients. It is the dispensary's jobs. They are licensed for one thing, to grow and sell marijuana, period. And I was told that, and that they are not licensed to educate anyone. I mean, so the way it was explained to me, you need a license.
I have a different point of view than that.
Well, but I'm just saying, please, this was given by a legislature. You need a license to cut somebody's hair in this state. There is nobody in a dispensary licensed for anything.
Thank you.
And that's the state's view. And I've been beating up on the dispensaries, blaming them, and it's not their fault. They're doing just what the state wants.
Can we do one more with this gentleman?
Very quick.
1 minute.
1 minute.
I've been trying really hard to get my medical card, but basically, as it stands right now, because of my eye incident, I am going to be prescribed Oxycontin over marijuana.
Yeah.
And so I refuse to take Oxycontin, even though that is a highly addictive opiate.
Absolutely.
That is more easier for me to get a jar full of Oxycontin than it is for me to smoke marijuana, and which is
I've been battling that for years.
I know, but like, for me, it's
essentially, we didn't know what to expect, and what did we get? I think we got a lot of good input, and the recognition that it is complex what we're trying to do, and I think I would say we still believe that we need to push forward to try and make something happen in the next session, and do our best to put a package of possibilities together that will respond and answer some of the questions that the legislature is having to deal with.
And each of you have to go to your legislators, senators, and representatives, and when people call for testimony, and you do have expert testimony, and you do it well, you sign up so that your voice can be heard, because that is the process.
So I have another point of view on that, because every time we go to one of these things, no matter what the issue is, go to your legislature and do this stuff. I don't think that happens that much. Maybe it does. Not as much as it needs to happen. I think there's a point of view that we started with, which is about economic development, business creation, job development, that's important as the underpinning of advancing this whole conversation here in Vermont. So, yes, we need to go to legislators, but we also need to have a cohesive approach to advancing the possibility that this is in fact an exciting new industry that Vermont could have a leadership position in. That requires defining that more clearly. That requires outlining the possibilities for that. That requires, a growing process that we can put forth as aligned with as many people as possible. Because then you'll have something to advocate for your legislature.
Can we agree with Brad that it's a civil right?
Yeah, and a human rights issue.
Yeah, it's a human rights issue.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.